Okay, so we're back after a major hiatus. I would call it a hiatus in doing videos. In fact, it's like we haven't done a video in so long. I just forgot how to do videos. You know, I'm gonna try to accomplish it. Hopefully, it will go well. Hopefully, it's kind of like riding a bike, you know, with videos, you know, or it should be for other people. But this lecture is going to be primarily for image theory, but it's also going to serve as a lecture for introduction to mass media, surely due to the fact that in both classes now we're rounding off with the same book. And I made that decision predicated on the idea that for both classes it was like urgent. It was totally applicable to the subject matters of both classes, specifically with image theory. You know, but also with intro to mass media in terms of what we had gone over in terms of media consolidation and media conglomeration and the things that we talked about with Adam Schiffer concerning media bias and Mr. Kelly in terms of journalism. And all of it just kind of is of a piece to start to talk about the ways in which all these different forces that we've already termed neoliberalism, all right, from the first lecture, how this ideology that crept into the American economy, that crept into American politics, that crept into every civic and public and government institution, and not only in the United States, but in most of Western and most of the developing nations, and we call that globalization. All right, how these ideas started to affect everything, how they infiltrated everything, including the ways in which not only my generation, but my parents' generation, and now your generation kind of is influenced in the ways that you see the world. And what Henry Giroux wants to talk about in neoliberalism's war on higher education is, guess what? The way that neoliberalism has attacked higher education. You know, and the state in which it's left things on the level of finances, on the level of the overarching culture of the university system, and the ways in which the public education system and and elementary and post and secondary school and the whole thing is kind of a piece. All right, all of it is kind of like, you know, I mean, the best metaphor would be like a series of dominoes or a house of cards, like we had talked about, you know, in the lecture. Like, you know, you take out one piece, it's like it's all kind of interlinked at this point. It all affects each other, you know, and it's all driven by these primary forces that I would argue have ultimately extremely crippled, if not totally destroyed, the national economy. B, made us totally unequipped to handle any kind of like major stressor to that system, such as the pandemic. You know, and C is going to have long-lasting effects in terms of your lives and your prospects for years and probably decades to come, you know, and we need to talk about this. And I feel that, you know, as university educators, you know, no matter what flavor you come to this from, you know, whether you're coming to it from like media studies, whether you're coming to it from, you know, business, whether you're coming to it from even the sciences, you know, it's like your generation, and I'm not just speaking to like the 19 to 24-year-olds, but even you non-traditional students, you know, have to know like what you're up against. You need to know what you're up against, because I would say that there's two things that I would say about this. One, what you're up against and what you're going to be up against through a lot of your adult life is going to be formidable and challenging. But on the other side of this, and I have said it before, if people start responding in the ways that we need to respond, if people start organizing and becoming educated, in the ways that we need to, if people start putting pressure on these forces that have been controlling the game for the last 50 years, not only can we probably start to see daylight, we can probably get through this pandemic, but perhaps even on the other side of it, we can start rethinking a system or a series of interlocking systems that's just a better way of doing things. That's a better way of managing things. That's a better way of remunerating people. More creative ways of doing things. And we've talked a lot about this we've certainly talked about this in image theory, coming off of our talks with Ethan Spigland and, our talks about the Situationists and that whole movement. It's how does one start to rethink one's society? So that it's a little more equitable, so that it's a little more free, so that it's a little less brutal, and a little less mean, because I think that the things that Giroux talks about here are very, very true. And he's writing in 2014 now, okay? But he sees Trump, he sees not just necessarily Donald Trump, but all of the forces, and it's not, and this is not just a Trump thing, and there's no more time left for Trump bashing, and there's no more time left for partisan politics. It is time, however, to start seeing, what the real factors are, and hopefully we've gained enough tools in both classes to get to a level of media literacy that we can start to pick through the bullshit and find the things that really apply to us and affect us and are going to have a lasting effect on our well-being into the rest of your lives. Now it's like you have an inkling. Now you have a little bit of the red pill, as we say in image theory, and now is the time, to not. There's no time for negativity. There's no time for despair. There's no time for, angry rages and loneliness and despair. It is a time to mobilize and get together, my friends. It is a time, and ultimately, it is a time that might prove to be the best time of your life. To actually, start to become a part of history again, as opposed to just a spectator. Start to actually engage in the process and start to see how your minds put together will start to have an effect on things, and start to recognize your own power, because there's 100 million of you. There's 100 million U.S. citizens under the age of 24, and that's a big demographic, my friends, and that demographic, if it can't move mountains, it can certainly move a lot of things, and the factors that affect your life for you and for your little brothers and sisters and your children. We need to start talking about these things, my people. We need to start talking about them. However, first we need to start talking about bullet points and things that are coming up, because much to my chagrin and my deep sadness, it's like this semester is quickly cavorting to the end. All right, we are coming to the end. The last day of classes is December 21st, which is a Monday. So the last actual class session will be on the 19th, which is when? It's blah, blah, blah. It's... Oh no, our last class session is going to be on Thursday. So we'll definitely plan on getting together. So we're going to do, once again, this is going to be like one of the last outlier lectures Because next week, certainly, we're going to want to meet on Tuesday, and we're going to probably want to meet for the last lecture, too. But anyway, and these bullet points apply both to COM 100 and COM 200, all right? But I'm going to parse it out. COM 200, image theory. You've got midterms that either need to come in. If you haven't got like a first draft in yet, it's like you are in the due, as we say. All right, and you need to like step up to this. You have very little time left. All right, or else just it's like if you are not in any kind of position to get a midterm out at this point, I would say you better throw all of your energy into a final project, and we'll just go and we'll just deal with it. That's for COM 200. You gotta get those midterm second drafts in, midterm essays, for both classes for COM 100 and COM 200. If you have not gotten a proposal into me yet for an essay, for a final paper or a final presentation, you must do this. You must get that in to me so I know what you're doing and I can respond to it. For both classes, COM 100 and COM 200, you've got blog comments. Some of you, I have to say, your performance on the blogs, for some of you it's been really good. For others of you, it has been less than stellar. And for some of you, it has even been non-existent. All right? And what I'm going to do with this is, here's what things are going to look like for me on the 22nd and the 23rd when I got to get grades in. I'm going to be looking at specific things. I'm going to be backtracking and going back through all the blogs and looking at the comments and looking at who commented and who didn't. And not only that, but when you did it. All right. My strong advice would be, it's better to have something up there than it's like better late than never. All right. Better to have something up there than to not have anything at all. I don't expect people, if people are starting at ground zero with this, and I know three of you that are, I would say don't try to do all of them. Just try to do the more recent ones. Try to maybe go back 3, 4, 5 lectures in your class. All right, I had at least one student just kind of throw me comments for both COM 100 and COM 200, and I was just like, it's like, you only have to respond to the videos that are specifically addressed to your class. Unless it's a situation with a guest speaker or something that was an extra credit thing that you, because I know that some of the blogs involve some of the guest speakers. A couple of them I still have to upload. I will upload them by early this week. I know I got the one up with Adam Schiffer. I know I still need to get the one up with Keith Kelly and Ethan. Those are extra credits. All right, so I'm going to be looking at the blogs. All right, I'm going to be looking at the discussion threads to see who got their media scans in, who got their assignments in, and who responded to different things. Did you, when you were supposed to respond? I'm going to take all that into consideration. By the way, BTW. Isn't it interesting how the acronym is actually to sound it out phonetic? You know what I'm saying? BTW. Both COM 200 and COM 100. The final paper presentation threads are on the blogs under discussion. If you've finished early, and a couple of you have, you're free to upload them. Because remember what I said about, I'm going to give you, everything's got to be in by Monday. However, there's that 1 day grace period where I would strongly suggest maybe looking at some of your peers' projects and commenting on them, and I will take those into consideration for extra credit. But that's going to be like at the very end of the fourth. It's like at the end of the fourth quarter in the game, you know. But if you can get some comments out to your peers by say like Tuesday, I'll look at those threads Wednesday morning and see what people have to say. I'm not going to have a lot of time to do feedback on final page because I'm allowing you to go right up to the end in terms of your due date. I'm not going to have very little to zero time to actually comment on your final projects because there's no time. You know, if you want input, you know, you can make a special request to me and I'll definitely, you know, address it, or we can talk about it. You know, but that feedback might not occur. I mean, if you get your paper or project in by the 21st, that feedback might not be possible until after the semester is done, but I'm more than willing. But then again, it's like feedback is feedback. You know, it's like as a student, I was always interested, even after a grade was in, I was always kind of interested. You know, if I had worked really hard on something, I was always interested in what, you know, the prof thought about the paper or whether it was a good, you know, regardless of what grade I got. You know, it's like, you know, when you get an A, you figure, oh, it's like, you know, but, you know, it's like, I think you want to know, like, when something is good and when something isn't. So, also media scans. Some of you in Com 100 with outstanding media scans, we need to get those up, you know. So, I mean, I'm kind of in the situation where, you know, it's like, how do I say this in a way that is not incriminating? I've been more than aware of what people have been going through with this pandemic and how people got de-energized and how people got unfocused and how people just started to throw their hands up in the air, you know, when they started getting this slew of emails in and when they started getting bombarded with all these different collaborating Zoom sessions and this, that, and the other thing, and how some people got reduced to being a deer in the headlights, so to speak, you know, and, you know, to those people, I'm just going to simply say that I'm going to be as forgiving as I can with the grades, you know, I'm going to be as forgiving as I can, you know, but at the same time, it's like, I need to be fair, and if somebody, you know, it's like, I certainly can't in any way, like, either, you know, by the very nature of my position, and just for the sake of common sense, it's like I certainly cannot, you know, bequeath the same grade to somebody that just kind of phoned it in versus the person that showed up and the person that did the work, you know. So, you know, it's like, you know, for some of you, grades are going to be tricky, you know, for me to like calculate, you know, but I am in the past, what generally has been the case is that a lot of people have a tendency to get everything in at the last minute, and it's like under these current circumstances, you know, it's like I'm going to be more than forgiving with various and sundry situations, all right, in terms of like grades, all right. But there's been a couple people that there's a couple people that just went MIA really early in the semester, never dropped the class. And I know this probably doesn't apply to any of you watching this, but I had like at least like 2 or 3 people like just not show up like in any way. And then even reaching out to them, didn't hear from them. So they're going to be dealt with accordingly, unfortunately. But all right, let's get back to what we were doing. with Giroux. Now that we got all that kind of squared away. We talked about this whole idea of like, you know, what was neoliberalism? What was the overall economic policies, you know, that drove it? What was the economic philosophy that drove it? What was the idea? What was the overall? Because it was more than neoliberalism is more than just economics. It is the way that we view human interaction, right? You know, there was this whole shift in this idea of from the public good and a kind of democratic public commonweal, like a public sphere, into this idea of individualism and this whole idea of freedom being predicated, on the freedom to make your way in the world financially and economically as a financial being, you know, to be an entrepreneur, you know, and to be able to, you know, operate with as much impunity as possible. Impunity meaning government regulation or any government speed bumps, right? This whole idea kind of springs up that has to really do with, I mean, let's call it what it is, a kind of what is usually referred to as social Darwinism, all right? Those of you who went to science class in high school know what Darwin's theories were about evolution and survival of the fittest, and the ideas of, you know, those species that were the most fit to survive in a given environment, you know, given, you know, certain external circumstances and certain genetic circumstances would thrive, whereas others would perish. And what we see with neoliberalism and neoliberal policies and philosophy all kind of hinges on these same kind of ideas of this kind of survival of the fittest. But unlike hereditary theory and evolutionary theory, it's not about survival of the biological fittest, it's survival of the financially fittest. The ones that can afford, it's like ultimately, it's as brutal and as stark as this. Those who have the money, those who have the means to survive and thrive will, and those that can't will perish, all right? Now, within that whole schemata, within that whole scheme, is this underlying mythology, ideology, this underlying idea, this underlying theory that those at the top of the financial food chain would, being the innovators that they were, being the corporate superheroes that they were going to create jobs. You know, that the system, you know, of the corporate magnates, of the corporate owners, of the robber barons, you know, that they were going to be the job creators, you know, so that we always had these kind of euphemistic terms for all these things, you know, instead of being like, you know, it's like, you know, as strategic talking points of the right, you know, there was this whole idea that you weren't like, you know, the Bezoses of the world and the Steve Jobs of the world and the Lee Iacocca's of the world were not just plain greedy, but they were job creators. They were creating jobs. They were making a better world, you know, and benefiting directly from it, you know. So that's it in its basic articulation, you know. Then, and we have to understand that this starts as a response to, you know, a whole series of like social, what was called the social welfare state created after the Great Depression and World War II in order to take care of in order to recorrect the imbalances that unstable capitalism would create in terms of, for instance, periods of like wage stagnation or periods of like rampant unemployment. And we've seen this time and time again, throughout capitalism's history, right? And we've gone through this, we've gone over it, over and over again. These booms and these busts. These times where everybody got laid off, the dot-com crisis, the subprime mortgage crisis, people, where, it's like this whole way of structuring the economy stopped working for the mass of people. And there would be a backlash, And what usually would happen at these points is that the people that were the supposed losers in this game had to be, it's like, if we were going to live in anything that even vaguely resembled civilization, these people that were unemployed, these people that were elderly, these people that, were, for whatever reason, incapable of finding or securing a sustainable living wage, needed to be accounted for and needed to be taken care of, because as a sane and civil society, that was the idea, that we were a moral system, above and beyond all of this, above and beyond all of this kind of tinkering around and the way we thought about man as what they called homo economicus, or this whole financialization of every aspect of human life. Still within it stood this elephant in the living room about what was the difference between right and wrong that we learned in grade school, that we learned in religious ed, that we learned when we read certain books, that the whole idea of empathy, the whole idea of compassion, the whole idea of forgiveness, the whole idea of forbearance, the whole idea of looking at your neighbor's troubles as your own, and feeling some compassion in order to do something. With neoliberalism, that no longer becomes a thing. With neoliberalism, it's like, more often than not, the people at the top of the food chain figure if you couldn't make it in this system, too bad. It's like, we'll throw a few crumbs to you, but, and what did we talk about? The ways in which these public inadequacies, these public structural deficiencies in the system, in the way that the system was organized as a form of governance, as a form of distribution, as a form of life, the ways in which, when that periodically fell apart, the people that, for whatever reason, had benefited the most and had the most liquidity rationalized to themselves, the idea that they had earned it, too bad, and we're not giving it away, and hence this is where, and then the question that Giraud ultimately poses in all this is simply, what happens if a system is driven by these kind of ideas? All right, how do they affect the practice of education? How do they? It's like, what primacy? Where is education in the pecking order of all of this? How much value do we give education? How much funding do we give education? How much status do we give the education of our children? Okay, in a system that is designed the way that the system is. And I think what Giraud wants to do in the introduction is set the stage, all right, by looking at a lot of different aspects of the system itself, all right? And we want to talk, and I want to get to page 11. Because I know there's a lot going on in this, but he talks, we've set the stage, all right? And he wants to kind of talk about neoliberalism's, the cruelty involved in it, that kind of drove it, this kind of unconscious underlying level of like meanness and disregard and cruelty that this ideology didn't necessarily reward, but made all right and made it something that was okay, and that was best exemplified in the movie and in Wall Street with Michael Douglas playing Gordon Gekko saying like, "Oh, greed is good, right? Greed is good." And Oliver Stone, the director of Wall Street, was being highly ironic about it, because what Wall Street was as a film was really an indictment of this, unyielding, unapologetic, unsympathetic greed that was driving the machine as early as that period, all right? So Jerome wants to he says neoliberalism is the new lingua franca of cruelty. What does lingua franca mean? Lingua franca is just it's an Italian term, really, that basically means the way people are talking, the common form, like the common discourse. The common idioms that we use, the common language, the common tongue of a people, hence lingua franca. He says the harsh realities of a society defined by the imperatives of punishment, cruelty, militarism, secrecy, and exclusions can also be seen in a growing rhetoric of insult, humiliation, and slander. All right? So he's saying that what we start to see in the overall culture is a kind of, what we start to see in our politics. And it's certainly come to a head, with the Trump era. I'm not going to just say Trump. I'm going to say the Trump era of a kind of meanness and mudslinging and a calling of names that has become like acceptable within this whole like kind of social Darwinist conception of human life, of the survival of the fittest. It seems as if certain forms of agreed upon civility and just good manners and decency have kind of gone the wayside, all right? And he talks about how this is filtered into our institutions, all right? Into our political institutions, into our penal institutions, for instance, and the legal system, this whole genre of making fun of criminality and these Judge Judy shows and all this other fucking nonsense that basically shamed the people who that did wrong, or somehow failed at the game, and how that demographic was not just ridiculed, but and this valorization of law enforcement, this kind of these shows like Cops, these shows like Judge Judy and Cops were always kind of they were always kind of framed in a way in which, it's like both the victims and the perpetrators of the system were looked at as being beneath contempt and worthy of ridicule, and we all laughed along with them, and America all laughed these are the losers of the game, and it's in this kind of insidious way that this kind of stuff crept into the mainstream culture where it had not been as prominent before. Reality TV shows, whose whole setup was predicated on, fucking over your neighbor. It's like it's like how much of our culture, of our mainstream culture, started to consist of these games and these contests and these forms of exhibition that rewarded those who were the most deceitful, those who were the most cruel, those who were the most backstabbing, right, amongst us. So it became a kind of culture, all right? And within that culture, within that name calling, people are it's like the great George Orwell said in 1984. It's like you change the language, you change reality. Reality can only be as good as what you call things, all right? Or it can only be as rich, or it can only be as limited by what you call things. So this whole idea, for instance, Giraud starts talking, he says teachers, are referred to as welfare queens by right-wing pundits, right? Like the Rush Limbaughs and the Hannitys and the O'Reillys and this whole pack of frickin' blood-drinking ghouls, these sons of Satan that populated the airwaves, all right, for a while, would have the audacity to label people like me, who decided to get into a vocation that wasn't really financially remunerative, to the degree of, say, people in the fracking and defense industry and people that got into like corporate consulting, how we were just losers, those of us who looked at it as being in the public interest to make sure people were properly educated. So we got slandered, and within all that, we have to understand that neoliberalism ultimately becomes, and Giraud will talk about this, there's this anti-intellectualism that goes on, all right? Because, within the overarching spectacle, as we say in image theory, of this thing, the people with the adequate tools, whether it be in terms of education or whether it be in terms of their position, that call this neoliberal system on its crap, are looked at as being the enemy. As like, it's like the emperor's new clothes. It's like the little boy. It's like, the little boy that realizes that the emperor is not. It's like that the emperor is not wearing any clothes is not looked at very fondly by the system, and hence is given negative reinforcements or negative incentives, to not call the system out, to not be critical, to not show it for what it is, to not explain it, step by step and break it down for the mass of people to understand how unfair it was, how irrational it was, and how many people suffered from it. System doesn't want that. Doesn't want teachers that are teaching you how to be critical and to have critical skills. Doesn't want teachers telling you that the game, the ways in which the game is rigged, and the ways in which you can actually empower yourself. They don't want you to know. They don't want you to know how you can empower yourself, or how you can rethink society, or how you can reimagine it, Basically, what happens now in public education and higher education is this, it's like, you come here, we get you disciplined, don't talk back, take what we teach you, don't question it, And if you are a good boy and girl, or a good boy or a good girl, and you take the right classes, and if you're willing to serve the military-industrial complex, or you're willing to serve the pharmaceutical complex, or you're willing to serve the administrative complex, you will be financially rewarded. All right? If you decide to get into, God forbid, you decide to get into, disciplines and the arts and the humanities that are run counter to that machine, you'll suffer accordingly. No jobs for you. Hence the whole idea, in our society of the starving artist, the person that took the wrong classes, and Giroux is going to say a lot about this defunding of the humanities, right? The humanities. What are the humanities? History, literature, sociology. What a lot of media arts, right, are considered the humanities. Those, for the neoliberal apparatus, it's not that those things are totally unimportant, but they're kind of like sidebar things, that don't really serve this whole other kind of militaristic, war machine of duplicity. All right? It's like, so that those things are kind of pushed aside. And the people that engage in those kind of things more often than not struggle. And it gets to a point where those disciplines, are not only not, financially rewarded, but we just accept it as normal. We accept the idea that, people that get into the humanities or people that, teach at the public high school, we've just accepted this whole game of the idea, like, for instance, that, if you're going to teach high school, you're not going to make a lot of money, all right? Or if you're going to teach, or if you're going to get into theater, or if you're going to get into film, if you're going to get into photography, you're not going to make a lot of money. Who the hell said, and two, can it be different? And why not? Why not? And we shall find that out, my friends. We shall find that out. So, he talks about this kind of meanness that springs in. Right? Conservative radio host Rush Limbaugh claimed that Michael J. Fox was faking the symptoms of Parkinson's disease. Remember Michael Fox? Great actor from Family Ties and a lot of other stuff. He got Parkinson's disease, which he bravely battled and became a kind of spokesperson and this kind of role model for anybody that was suffering from that disease. It's like, and we saw the same thing with this. We saw the same kind of rhetoric and the same kind of name calling and the same kind of sticking your tongue out at the weak or the victims of the culture by the Donald. What he said about crippled people, what he said about people like John McCain, who had been captured, who was a war hero, whereas Trump never served. It's like, how dare you? How dare you? And I get particularly pissed off about the whole thing because my father served. My father served in the United States Army, and the guy running the country, the commander-in-chief of this country, did not. And that's a big deal. It's a big. It wouldn't be as big a deal for a commander-in-chief who hadn't served, who hadn't seen combat, to take on that role if he was, as long as he wasn't making fun of the people that did. How dare him do it? But guess what, folks? He got away with it. And you know what? Millions of people laughed right along with him. Millions. What have we become? What have we become? All right? In this age. All right? Take the pandemic. How do we now look at the elderly? with 3,000 people a day dying. 3,000 Americans a day are dying. Many of them elderly. Where did we make this decision that disposing the elderly was okay? How do we live with ourselves with it? How do we live with ourselves with it? Because what I like to say is this. You can tell the level of a civilization by how it treats its elderly. You know? Civilizations of the past, different, even my parents' generation. But going back through history, through the ages, the idea of reverence for seniority, for the elderly, and many cultures, and many different cultures were treated as royalty because of their wisdom, because of their wherewithal, because of the fact that they knew more than we did, because they had seen more, you know. So that in most cultures, the elderly were revered, taken care of, and often ran things. You know, what do we do with our elderly? What have we done with our nursing homes, my friends? All right, what have we done to these? It's like, you know, my father's last surviving brother, my Uncle Tony, lost his wife 4 days ago. My aunt, in a nursing home. All right? Didn't even have a chance to say goodbye. Didn't have a chance to say goodbye. Let's get back to this. Fox faking the symptoms of Parkinson's disease when he appeared in a political ad for Democrat Claire McCaskill. And the public is routinely treated to racist comments, slurs, and insults about Barack Obama. Remember when this was written, 2014. Obama would have still been in office, you know, and there was, I don't know if you remember or not, there was this kind of underlying racism, you know, that no one really wanted to fess up to, you know, but a lot of people on the right, you know, at least, you know, secretly, you know, kind of were, you know, like, well, it's like, this is this, you know, so there's all of this, you know. Republican presidential candidate Mitt Romney echoed the harshness of this new lingua franca of cruelty when asked during the 2012 campaign about the government's responsibility to the 50 million Americans who don't have health insurance. Incredibly, Romney replied that they already have access to health care because they can go to hospital emergency rooms. So, you know, it's like, it's all right. It's like, it's all right if you don't have health care. You can go to a hospital. To the emergency room, but there's a caveat to that, my folks. There's a ton of reasons why that is just simply horse puppy. All right, and it has to do in response. All right, and the New York Times kind of called Romney out on this. Right, the editorial stated that the emergency room care is the most expensive and least effective way of providing care. And such a remark the remark that Romney made now, reeks of contempt for those left behind by the current insurance system, suggesting that they must suffer with illness. They must suffer with illness until they get to a point where they have to go. See, I have like sound effects in this one, where they have to go to the hospital by ambulance, right? It's going on all around us, all right? It's like, you know, because they have no preventative care, you know, and we all know what's going on with the minorities in this country and people of color, you know, who disproportionately lack health insurance, live with pre-existing illnesses, and don't go to the hospital until it's absolutely necessary. That's not preventative medicine, my friends. With preventative medicine, you have a healthcare system in which you go in for it's like, you know, I'm lucky enough at this point, knock on Formica, you know, that I have like, you know, pretty much full coverage health insurance that I pay for, you know, that, you know, allows me to, you know, get things done, you know, like I had to go to actually I paid for the oral surgeon this week, but I go to the doctor and be able to pay for it, medications, be able to pay for it. I go, going in, once a year or whatever, and having blood work done, having your blood pressure taken, especially when you're getting older. When you don't have health care, when you don't have health insurance, you don't do that stuff because you can't afford it. Because sometimes it becomes the difference between, a doctor room visit, a visit to the primary, or eating that week, or making your car payment that week, or paying rent that week. So that, there's a direct relationship in this society between being low on the financial totem pole and illness, and we've already talked about that. All right. And he gets into neoliberalism and the retreat from ethical considerations. And he says at the top of this subheading, he says, not only does neoliberal rationality believe in the ability of markets to solve all problems. Remember, we've taken everything away from, it's like small government, right? It's like markets will solve all of our problems. It will solve all these problems. It also removes economics and markets from ethical considerations. And we all know about that. Economic growth rather than social needs drives politics, right? The decision-making process, all right? And then he's going to get into some statistics here. Then he's going to get into some statistics that kind of tell you where public education falls. What are the priorities in this system? Well, the first priority in a neoliberal system is what? Is to generate as much profit as possible for the people that are lucky enough to be the profiteers. Where does a lot of that profit come from in U.S. society? I don't think it's a secret, my friends. The defense industry, both the public and private defense industry in this country, the amount of money that the United States spends in terms of defending itself is 10 times, look it up, is 10 times more. Our military budget is 10 times more than the next 9 major Western countries combined. And that includes the UK, China, and Russia. We are 10 times more than the other 9 combined. All right? Why all that money? Where'd all that money go? And where is it going? It's going into people's pockets, my friends. All right? Neoliberalism's massive disinvestment in schools, right? Why all these school cutbacks? Why cutbacks on all the sections of your classes when all of a sudden you're allowed fewer and fewer options on the menu, with all that money that you're paying. Why are the teachers that are teaching you like part-time with no health insurance? When they get sick, it's like, where do they go? What about these teachers that got 120 other students besides you? All right? And no teaching assistants to help them. How much attention are you going to get in that game for your tuition money? All right? When they're cutting sections, when they're trying to do more with less. All right? But we're going to get into like the whole administrator game. All right? Because we need to talk about the administrators of our hallowed educational institutions and how much more money they're making than the people that are actually doing the teaching. All right? Need to talk about that. Neoliberalism's massive disinvestment in schools. Cutbacks. 20% cutback this year in New York State public education. Why? Where'd it go? Where'd the money go? Social programs, all right? All the social programs that Henry Giroux has already hit to the game in 2014 about how many things are getting knocked out that people need for their kids, to take care for the elderly, for the unemployed, and an aging infrastructure, all right? Drive down any highway, my friends. Look around you. Look around at the streets. Look around at the sanitation. Look around on the bridges, all right? Some stuff's getting done, but most of it's falling apart. Our infrastructure in this country is falling apart to the point where it's becoming dangerous. Because there's no money left. Where'd the money go? Where'd it go? Aging infrastructure. It's not about lack of money. There was money, my friends. There was money. Alright? The real problem stems from government priorities that inform both how the money is collected and how it is spent. More than 60% of the federal budget goes to military spending, all right? Military spending, that includes R&D of research and development of weapons, that includes things like Homeland Security and surveillance, that includes things like the NSA, the CIA, our foreign wars, all the money that we use to say train troops. All right, all of that. 60% of everything that the government has goes to that. Goes to defending the country. Am I saying that the country should not be defended? Not by a long shot, my friends. Yes, we should. Yes, because of our misdeeds, unfortunately, we have become more of a target for other competing nations than ever. All right? Do we need defense? Yes, of course we need defense. But does it need... But here's the question that you need to ask yourself. Does it need to be 10 times more than the other 9 Western countries combined? Does it need to be 10 times more than that? All right? And where is that money going, folks? All right? It's you would figure... God forgive me for getting into it, but Bongiorno is going to get into it. You would figure, with that kind of money diverted to things like military intelligence and surveillance and things like knowing what's going on in foreign countries and infiltrating enemy countries and enemy groups, with all that money and all those strategies and all those techniques, you think that they would have maybe figured that on September 11th of the year 2000, that there had been this massive, highly structured plan to take 4 jumbo 747 jets, hijack them, and aim them at 4 of the major national landmarks in this country. You'd think they would have figured... It's with the money we were spending, maybe they could have figured it out and prevented it. How about the 2 wars that we're currently fighting? Still, after how many years that we're losing? Okay? That we're losing? Against what? Against what kind of power? Alright? It's if you're spending that much money... It's sorry. It's if I'm spending that much money out of my budget for something like defense, you'd think I could win. You'd think I'd be winning. Folks, the game is rigged. They don't want to win. They don't want to prevent. They have no interest in your safety and security. They don't care about that. What they care about is being able to generate as much profit from this machine as they can and keep it going in what is called a perpetual war state. Alright? That's the game. Alright? It's not about winning wars anymore. It's about financing the wars. It's about contractors making money. It's about conquering areas where there's a profit that can be made. Alright? And it's about subcontractors and intelligence contractors getting these huge bids and these huge contracts to make a lot of money. Because if it was about winning wars, you'd think that we could figure out 2 fairly you'd think we would have made short shrift of 2 relatively underdeveloped countries, with paltry military might. All right? It's think about it. Doesn't take conspiracy theorists. More than 60% of the federal budget goes to military spending, while only 6% is allocated towards education. 6% towards education. The United States spends more than $92 billion on corporate subsidies and only $59 billion on social welfare programs. What does it say? What does it say about the society? You know, because we already talked about this idea of like where we already talked about this whole idea in both classes about a nation can only be this whole kind of democratic idea predicated on this assumption that your nation as a democracy can only be as good as your citizenry. How well informed they are they being taken care of, are they being told the truth? You know, democracies, and that's why the Founding Fathers put so much emphasis on things like literacy, right? You know, and we talked about that in Intro to Mass Media. At one point, the U.S. had the highest literacy rates in the world because we had this investment and this idea that an educated public would make the right decisions, make the right planning decisions, you know, get into the right fields in order to solve problems, you know, instead of like being fed misinformation, instead of being told that, for instance, the environment wasn't suffering, you know, or being told this or being told that the investment in education, you know, that everything ultimately starts, you know, one can make a case that, you know, everything kind of starts in the nuclear family, you know, but then again, it's like how well educated are the parents in that family? It's all kind of linked systemically, you know, but, you know, it's like educated parents, you know, tend to, let's face it, parents that are educated tend to be, you know, make more money than parents that have been, you know, kind of shunned by the system or weren't attended to in the way that the others were. All right, so the whole thing is just what it's called is social reproduction. All right, and it's like, you know, if your parents didn't go to college, there's a very likely potential that you won't. It's just self-perpetuating thing, you know. But that, you know, an educated citizenry, educated parents, you know, they tend to like, you know, be able to like be more be able to provide more for their children, you know, to be, you know, and tend to, you know, make, you know, the right decisions, you know, because they're not like, you know, they're, yeah. So there's that, you know. As Stanley Aronowitz points out, he's quoting another guy here on page 13. Public values and collective action have given way to, quote, the absurd notion the market should rule every human activity. All right? So that there's this dichotomy between public values. What are public values? The values that we all share in common, the things that I was talking about in the beginning of the lecture. Equity, doing unto others, having safe schools, having safe roads, making sure that your kid, it's like, you know, collective action, you know, these shared values that we have, you know, or that we should have, because they're just commonsensical, you know. It's like, you know, a society where, you know, the larger, it's like the more of your citizenry that are educated with good education and good schools, you know, usually go on to be, you know, fairly successful, you know, and educated, you know, and it's a win-win. You know, it's a public investment, all right? It's an investment, you know, when a government makes an investment in education, and most Western countries, you know, it's like that, you know, investment in public education is looked at as a win-win with instant returns. It's one of those it's what was formerly known as a public good. That you wanted good schools, that you wanted that you wanted affordable education, and you wanted everybody to be treated equally, because when the water rises, all the boats float, all the boats rise up under those kind of conditions. But what we had was a situation where we decided the market could do it better. So people bitched and moaned about things like school taxes, because and in a lot of places, people find school taxes are very high, because they're put on the bulk of people that really don't have the money to start with. Same with property taxes. But who are the people that are ignored? The people with all the money, So the absurd notion the market should rule out every human activity, including the absurd neoliberal idea that users should pay for every public good, from parks and beaches to highways and higher education. All right? There was a time, my friends, back in the midst of time, where these things, these public goods, parks, beaches, highways, schools, they were just like part of the package. When you went into a place and they took the 8% sales tax off, like that $8 you got to pay on a dollar thing, that money was supposed to go to these things so that you weren't like paying for them double. They were supposed to provide for that. Instead, it's like that's where the money was supposed to go. So that when you go to Greenwood Park or Cole Park or wherever, you weren't supposed to have to pay like $10 to get in, because it was already supposed to be paid for with your taxes. Same thing with tolls. That was a whole scam. When it costs like $20 to drive a car into New York, wasn't supposed to happen, folks. Your tax money was supposed to pay for the highways, not the tolls. All right, that's the extra they take out of you. That's the extra. All right? Highways, same thing. And higher education. Same thing, folks. It's a win-win. To go in, and we'll talk more about it. The whole immorality and amorality of a for-profit university system. All right? And how other countries flourish. And I can start naming like 10 that you don't pay a cent. All right? And all those and all those countries with free education, my friends, all those countries with free higher education up to a certain level, the quality of life on every indicator that we usually use, everything from like infant mortality to mortality rates to level of gun violence, are all like good, are all like sustainable, far more sustainable, robust living situations that we have. It's like you would think everything would be falling apart with free education. It's like if you're not making money and it's like, come on, my friends, come on. So you got that. Too many young people today learn quickly, as you are learning, that their fate is solely a matter of individual responsibility, or so you are told. Right? It's up to you to make your way in this world. All right? You need to take the right courses. You need to get off your ass and do the right things and be rewarded. All right? This whole idea, that was a thing for a long period of time when there was still jobs. All right? But this whole idea of individualism is predicated on the idea that the system is set up in order for that to happen. But what does Giroux say here? Too many young people today learn quickly that their fate is solely a matter of individual responsibility, legitimated through market-driven laws that embrace self-promotion, hyper-competitiveness, and surviving in a society that increasingly reduces social relations to social combat. Social relations to social combat. Where does it start? My friends, it starts in preschool. It starts in kindergarten. It starts with walking in on the first day and passing certain tests that have been or ascribing to certain metrics, and being either put in the group of the smart kids or being put in the group with learning disabilities, all right? And then all kinds of different names and different diagnoses are subscribed to these people that couldn't make the grade over here. As opposed to an education system that would have found the things that those people do well. Not everybody is meant to be a rocket scientist. Not everybody is meant to be a mechanical engineer. Not everybody is meant to be one of the Big Bang Theory guys. Do students with learning disabilities, for instance, perhaps have other highly valuable skills, mechanical skills, social skills, artistic skills? It starts very early, folks. The hyper-competitiveness starts very early. It's like, and earlier than it should. Self-promotion. And surviving in a society that increasingly reduces social relations to social combat. It's everywhere around us. It's in the warp and woof, as they say, of everything. Everything is predicated on what? Competition. Who gets the A's? Who gets the B's? Who gets on the team? Who doesn't? Who gets into the best schools? Who doesn't? And it's all socially reinforced with what? A mainstream media that caters to it. And now with social media, it's become more competitive than ever. How many followers do you have? How many people retweet your stuff? The whole thing is just this savage fight to the death. Young people today are expected to inhabit a set of relations in which the only obligation is to live for oneself and to reduce the obligations of citizenship to the demands of a consumer culture. The only thing that you have to worry about in this definition of citizenship is how well you consume, what you consume, and how good of a consumer are you. Whose shirts are you wearing? What kind of car are you driving? What sneakers are you wearing? All right? This whole hierarchy, this whole pecking order of social capital that drives the whole machine. Influencers. Branding yourself. Now it's you literally got teachers telling you, if you want to make it, you got to be a brand. That you need to brand yourself as something. That you need to market yourself, as a commodity. All right? What it really is, my friends, is clear. It's 1:15. We'll call it a break for now. But we can start to see how this system has kind of affected public education, and what the values are, and we want to get deep. And as we continue to read Giroux for the next week, we'll get deeper into the ways that it has affected and deformed the democratic elements of education. All right? And and by the very end, we're going to be at a place where you can start to make decisions about what needs to be changed. all right, and what you need to demand, really, you know, and what you need to fight for, all right. We'll get into it. We'll see you soon. I should have this up by tomorrow night, and I'm done for tonight. Thanks.